for 3 quiet afternoons, lain across the same shaded bend of Riverside Park, and each time, a stranger sat waiting beneath the oaks as if he'd been carved into the bench itself. She hadn't meant to notice him. It started with the bench, its peeling green paint, its metal plaque dulled by years of rain. It was part of her daily loot, nothing more. But once she saw the man occupying it, she couldn't seem to unsee him. He appeared every day at the exact same hour, noon to 1, sitting as upright as a statue, a dark blue hardcover resting against his chest. She found herself adjusting her schedule just enough to cross paths with him at 12:30, the way lonely people sometimes build quiet habits around the presence of strangers they'll never speak to. But there was something about him that kept tugging at her thoughts. He never moved. Not once. Not even to turn the page. The realization didn't land all at once. It crept up on her slowly. First as a question, then a suspicion, then a fact she could no longer push aside. Every time she passed, the book stood open to the same place. His finger resting along the inner margin never shifted, and his eyes, half hidden by oversized sunglasses, stayed fixed on the exact line. By the 4th day, the unease had settled in her stomach like a stone. On a gray Thursday morning, she decided to watch him properly. She slowed near the drinking fountain, pretending to study the faded park map. From 10 feet away, she had a clear view. Same page, same posture, same chilling stillness. Except now, something was different. The sunlight was weak, barely piercing the clouds, yet he wore dark lenses as if shielding himself from a blinding glare. And his face, she hadn't noticed before, seemed wrong. The makeup on his skin was too heavy, too smooth, like a mask someone had pressed on in a hurry. His hands were a natural pinkish tone. His face was not. She finished her route with a tightness in her throat. At the office, while drafting building specifications with the precision her job demanded, her mind drifted again and again to that one unmoving finger pinned to a page that never changed. That evening, curiosity finally won. She searched the book title she'd memorized from its spine, The Physicists. A play, short, easy to finish, yet somehow he'd been stuck in the same spot for days. She read the synopsis twice. Half of it didn't stick. All she could picture was the man frozen beneath the oaks, his finger marking a story he would never advance. The next day she altered her lunch walk, looping past the bench not once but twice. And both times, he was there. Same posture, same page, same stillness that now felt less like concentration and more like a secret. She set herself at a diagonal to him that afternoon, far enough to avoid suspicion, yet close enough to see every detail. Her sandwich sat untouched on her lap as she watched him hold the book at the exact same tilt, his finger fixed on page 47 like a bookmark carved from bone. He hadn't changed his outfit. The charcoal trousers, the soft cream shirt, the well-worn brown shoes, each crease, each fold exactly as before. Even his hair, slightly overgrown and curling at the collar, sat in the same place. He looked like a man in his mid-40s, but that strange stillness of his made age feel like a guess, not a fact. And the sunglasses, they hadn't left his face, even though the sky was dull and gray. For 45 slow minutes, she studied him. Nothing, not a breath, not a shift of weight, not the smallest tremor of life. The breeze rustled the oak leaves, lifting the edges of her napkin, yet the book in his hand stayed perfectly steady, as if the wind somehow moved around him. And the way he sat, it wasn't relaxed and it wasn't tense. It was beyond either. He held that posture like a figure that had forgotten what comfort even meant. By the time she tossed most of her sandwich into the trash, her nerves were frayed. Back at the office, she made two mistakes in a simple window schedule, errors so unlike her that her supervisor paused, concerned. She apologized, retreating to the restroom where she locked herself in a stall and breathed slowly, steadying the whirl inside her chest. She still couldn't name the feeling, only that it clung to her like cold mist. On her drive home, she ducked into a convenience store, hoping the mundane would ground her. The clerk scanned her items without lifting his eyes. She murmured thank you, expecting the routine nod, the polite hum. Nothing. He didn't even glance at her. On the sidewalk outside, something compelled her to look back. The clerk was laughing with the next customer, a man in a business suit, as if his silence had been reserved only for her. The next morning, tension knotted her stomach before she even reached the park. She arrived earlier than usual, scanning the bench. Empty at 11. At 11:30, a white van idled near the curb, and two people she couldn't clearly see unloaded something. By the time the van pulled away, the man was seated on the bench again, as perfectly arranged as before. No one around her reacted. Joggers passed. A couple walked their dog. Not a single head turned toward the van or the man it had delivered. She stepped onto the path and kept moving, pretending she hadn't noticed. But when she was 30 feet beyond him, something in her rebelled. She turned back. This time, she stopped right in front of him. Up close, the truth was impossible to ignore. The book was the physicist as she had first thought. It was the German edition, Die Physiker. His unmoving finger pressed against the beginning of page 47, the very first line, but the skin beneath that finger, she stared. It wasn't skin. Not anymore. The surface looked wrong, faintly shiny, faintly waxy, like something poured into a mold and left to harden. The makeup caked around his mouth only drew more attention to the artificial texture beneath it. And behind those sunglasses, she knew without needing to see that whatever lay beneath was hollowed out, sunken, discolored, or worse. And Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Up close, the truth carried a scent. Faint at first, almost hidden beneath an overdone splash of cologne, but still there. A strange sweetness, tinged with something sharp and synthetic. A smell that didn't belong to any living person. And she knew, with a sudden heaviness deep in her chest, that it would only grow stronger with time. Whatever had been done to him wouldn't hold for long. She stood there, mind scrambling for explanations that made sense, building and tearing down theories in the span of seconds. Maybe he was sick, in shock, in some kind of medical crisis. She could call for help. Someone would know what to do. But her fingers never reached for her phone. Another idea came, just as flimsy. Maybe he was homeless, medicated, lost in some unreachable place inside his mind. Maybe someone responsible would show up soon, a caseworker, a relative, anyone. But she knew that wasn't real either, because now she could see it clearly. He wasn't breathing. He had never been breathing. Not once in all the time she'd watched him. And worse, she realized he hadn't been sitting here for 3 days. Someone else had. They were swapping them, trading one body for another, maintaining the same posture, the same clothing, the same book open to page 47, carefully preserving a lie of uninterrupted presence. The understanding didn't hit like a scream. It settled calmly, the way you recognize the temperature of water after stepping into it. Quiet, certain, undeniable. He was dead. Had been dead for hours. Maybe since the morning, maybe longer. Someone had placed him here. Someone had taken the previous one away. The world around her didn't bend or warp. The air didn't chill. Children still laughed in the distance. Leaves still rustled overhead. Nothing changed except her awareness, sharp and terrifying, of what she had been walking past. And then a question rose, uninvited. How many times had she crossed this path before she noticed? How many afternoons had she wandered by, blind to the body carefully propped beside the oaks? She scanned the park, heart thudding hard. A mother pushing a stroller. Two men in shirt sleeves, chatting as they walked. A teenager who barely looked up from the music pumping into his ears. Not a single person seemed to see the corpse sitting 30 feet from them. She should call emergency services. She should shout. She should do something, anything, to force the world to look. Instead, she lowered herself onto the bench beside him. The wood felt warm from the sun. Their shoulders were less than 2 feet apart. The odor was stronger here, no longer ignorable, too sweet to be natural, too chemical to be safe. And she wondered, with a slow dread settling into her bones, how many others had sat right here, close enough to touch him, close enough to sense something was wrong, and still stood up afterward, brushed off their clothes, and walked away, without ever realizing what they'd shared a seat with. She found herself wondering, with a quiet, unsettling clarity, how many times she might have shared this bench with someone like him without ever truly seeing. How often had she passed through this park wrapped in her own thoughts, blind to the shape beside her. A woman pushing a stroller slowed as she approached, offering a quick, distracted smile in their direction. For a split second, Diane felt a strange urge to smile back, to reassure her, to behave as though she and the motionless man were nothing more than strangers enjoying an ordinary afternoon. Before she could gather the expression, the woman had already drifted past, her gaze locked on her phone. Diane's attention dropped to the man's hands, not just looking, studying. The fingers wrapped around the book's spine were set in a delicate curve, arranged with unnatural precision. The cuticles along his nails had pulled back, revealing thin crescents of drying flesh, and the ring, a simple gold band, sat too loosely, like his finger had shrunk after someone slipped it on. A fly touched down on his neck. Then another. They moved with a kind of grim purpose, tracing the path from collar to hairline, exploring the edge of the sunglasses. She waited absurdly for the reflexive flick, the irritated twitch, anything that would break the silence of his body. But he remained exactly as he was. More flies came. Someone had loved this man once. That thought struck her with sudden weight. Maybe someone still did. Maybe they were searching now, calling hospitals, filing reports, praying for answers. Or perhaps he had been like her, the sort of person whose sudden silence could stretch on for days, weeks, before anyone thought to wonder. An elderly man strode past, brushing her shoulder with his coat. The faint contact ran through her like a jolt. If he had reached out, if he had laid a hand on her arm, her cheek, he would have felt the temperature difference immediately. He would have known something was wrong. This whole setup depended on distance, on politeness, on the unspoken rule that strangers stayed in their own space. That buffer was the only thing keeping the illusion intact. The older man nodded at both of them, the easy courtesy of a passerby acknowledging neighbors he didn't know. Then he moved on without breaking pace. Diane stayed beside the corpse for 20 full minutes. In that time, dozens passed. Not one slowed, not one stared, not one so much as flinched. A jogger even clipped the dead man's shoe, stumbled, muttered a curse, and kept running without a second glance. She counted them. 27 people. 27 chances for someone to notice. And yet nothing. When she finally rose, something inside her shifted, not broken, not cracked, but rearranged, as if something fundamental about the way she understood the world had rotated into a new alignment. Back at work, she plunged into her tasks with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She finished the parking garage specifications 3 days early. She didn't call the police. She didn't report what she had seen. She simply returned to her routines, carrying the quiet, altered knowledge of a world where a dead man could sit in plain sight and be seen by no one at all. The police were never called. And by the following afternoon, the man from the bench was simply gone. The empty seat looked older now, stripped of its strange occupant, as if his presence had been holding the paint together. Diane walked by it 3 separate times during lunch, pretending she was just taking the long way around the park, but each pass carved a deeper hollow inside her. The emptiness felt louder than the body ever had. That evening, on her walk home, she stopped at a crosswalk near a bus stop. 3 people waited beneath the flickering streetlight. An elderly woman leaning close to the timetable, a young woman tapping at her phone, and a man in a suit sitting perfectly still on the bench. His hands rested on a briefcase. Sunglasses covered his eyes, though the sun had already dipped behind the buildings. From where she stood, he blended in seamlessly with the other commuters, a figure so ordinary he became invisible. Except she knew better now. She knew what movement looked like real movement, the small, unconscious shifts humans made without thinking. She watched the older woman sigh and roll her shoulders. The younger woman tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. They breathed, they blinked, they shifted their weight. The man on the bench did none of those things. The bus groaned to a stop. The 2 women boarded. He didn't. For a heartbeat, she expected someone, the driver, another passenger, to call out, to wave him aboard, to notice the stillness that wasn't stillness at all. But the doors shut. The bus lumbered away, and the man remained exactly where he was. Diane stepped into the street before she realized she was moving. She crossed with a strange calm, the kind that settles over someone who already knows the answer but needs to touch it to make it real. She sat beside him. The smell met her instantly. A harsh storm of cologne pushed against something sweet and rotting beneath. It was stronger than the scent in the park, fresher in its decay. Whoever placed him here must have done so earlier that day. By morning, he would be unusable. They'd remove him, replace him, set another body in his place, and life would keep flowing past without ever slowing down. The makeup was heavier this time, almost mask-like. Layers of powder smoothed over skin that was beginning to lose its definition. The hands gripping the briefcase were arranged with unnatural care, the fingers too perfectly bent, too evenly spaced, as though someone had placed them one by one like pieces in a display. His wedding ring glinted faintly beneath the streetlight, newer than the last man. She stayed there until the daylight drained away and the street turned to shadow. Cars rolled past. People approached, glanced, moved on. To them, they were nothing more than a pair of commuters waiting for their ride. 3 more buses stopped, 3 more left. He remained. She remained. and the city kept moving around two figures on a bench, one dead, one newly awakened to a truth nobody else could see. Her jaw, the posture frozen in a way no living person could sustain. The light from the tall windows fell across her face, revealing the faintest marbling beneath the foundation, the first hints of a body forgetting it once belonged to the world of the breathing. Diane stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind her. The click echoed in the quiet, like sealing something in. She told herself she should go back to work. She told herself she should tell someone. But the truth settled differently, deep and certain. No one would listen. No one would even look. On the sidewalk outside, the afternoon felt too bright. People hurried in every direction, brushing past one another with the soft collisions of city life, shoulders bumping, bags knocking, apologies muttered without eye contact. Everyone alive, yet somehow hollowed by habit. Everyone in motion, but only just enough. She threaded through them like a ghost. At home that night, she didn't turn on the TV. She didn't cook. She sat at her kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap and tried, truly tried, to be as still as the man on the bench, the man at the bus stop, the woman in the library. It was astonishing how unnatural stillness felt when you were alive. The itch behind the knee, the swallow you couldn't stop, the pulse in your throat you wished would quiet. She held the position for 8 minutes until tears blurred her vision, not from sadness, from effort. When she finally blinked, it felt like a small defeat. By Monday morning, the spot where the library woman had been was empty too. The chair pushed neatly under the table, the book returned to the shelf. The room looked untouched, as though she'd never been there. But Diane had seen her. And once you see something that's wrong, you carry it. That day, Diane watched her coworkers more closely. She watched the way one of them drummed a pen, the way another tugged a sleeve unconsciously, the way someone sighed after rereading an email. Small movements confirming life. And still a thought kept circling her mind, soft and persistent. What if I stopped? What if I held absolutely still for 1 hour, 2 hours in the middle of this office? How long before anyone noticed? At lunch, she left her sandwich untouched and walked again, not to the park, not to the bus stop, but somewhere quieter, somewhere no one should remain unseen. The cemetery. Between rows of old stones and statues, the world felt slow, like it was waiting for her. She sat on a bench overlooking a patch of winter-browned grass, folded her hands, straightened her back, and didn't move. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then 25. A groundskeeper drove by in a small cart, glanced in her direction, then kept going. A pair of teenagers wandered through the far path, never turning their heads. 2 more visitors passed, reading headstones, murmuring, grieving. None of them paused. None of them looked at her long enough to see what she was doing. When she finally inhaled again, deeply, sharply, the sound startled even her. Stillness, she realized, was a kind of vanishing. Not magic, not supernatural. Just unnoticed. Just like them. That evening, she sat in her apartment with the lights off, thinking of the park, the bus stop, the library, thinking of the hands, the rings, the makeup, the bodies arranged and replaced and ignored. She wondered, not for the first time, who placed them. But a heavier question now followed it. Who would place her? Diane stopped at the bottom step, feeling the old instinct of every generation before her rise in her chest. That quiet, ancestral warning that whispers this place is not meant for the living. The man closed the basement door behind them with a soft click. The sound felt final. He walked past her without speaking, moving toward one of the metal tables. Under the harsh lights, she saw what lay on it, not a body, not yet, but the pieces of someone being prepared to look like one. A wig styled neatly, clothing arranged with the precision of ritual, a bottle of cologne identical to the one she'd smelled at the bench, makeup palettes with tones that matched the dead woman in the library. He picked up a brush and cleaned it calmly, as if scrubbing tools after dinner. "You saw her," he said quietly, not accusing, not surprised. "The one with the upside-down book." Diane nodded, her throat dry. "She lasted longer than most," he continued. "People rarely look that long anymore. They barely see each other at all." His voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't proud. It was resigned, like someone doing a job inherited rather than chosen. Diane swallowed. Why do you place them like that?" He looked at her then, really looked, and there was something in his eyes that made her step back a little. Not madness, not violence. Loneliness. "Because no one notices the dead," he said. "Not at first, not anymore. Everyone walks past, earbuds in, heads down, rushing somewhere as if the world won't end without them." His expression tight. "So we give them another chance, a chance to be seen." Diane felt the room tilt. "But that's not normal. Someone should report it, someone should." "Should," he repeated softly. "People should notice each other. They don't. People should care. They don't." He set down the brush. "We don't choose the bodies. They come from the morgues, unclaimed, forgotten, left behind by families who never showed up, by friends who didn't bother, by strangers who walked past without a second glance." He gestured at the shelves along the wall, rows of neatly folded clothes, books, props, designed to simulate life. "They belong out there more than they do in the ground," he said. "At least until someone sees them, really sees them." Diane felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "I saw them." "Yes," he stepped closer. "You did." She backed up until she hit the cold metal of another table. "What does that mean?" she whispered. A softness crossed his face, almost pity. "It means you're not like the others." The lights hummed above them. "People who see," he said, "become part of the work." Diane's breath caught. I don't want to be part of this." He tilted his head, as if considering her words with gentleness rather than threat. "Neither did I, neither did any of us." He opened a drawer and she flinched, but he only pulled out a simple white card, identical to the one she'd been given. He placed it on the table between them. "This is the address for tomorrow's placement," he said quietly. "You'll go, you'll sit, you'll watch, that's all. If someone finally sees, you'll know what to do." Her hands trembled. "And if no one sees?" she asked. He gave a sad, tired smile. "Then you'll understand why we exist at all." Diane stared at the car, at the cold steel table, at the quiet, ordinary man who spent his nights giving strangers a last chance at being noticed. And somewhere deep inside her, deeper than fear, deeper than revulsion, she felt that same unsettling flicker she'd felt in the park, at the bus stop, in the library. A recognition. Something in the world had been broken long before she ever walked into this basement. And now she knew who was trying to hold the pieces together. "Take the card," he said softly. Her fingers closed around it before she realized she'd moved. The basement suddenly felt too bright, too sharp, too real. but the man's last words were barely more than a whisper. Tomorrow, someone will be watching you too. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Diane felt the weight of it settle over her like dust, slow, inevitable, impossible to brush away. Most assume he buries them, cremates them, handles things the way the world expects things to be handled, quietly, respectfully, out of sight. But instead, he gave them one last appearance in a world that had already turned its face away. Her gaze drifted back to the woman in the green dress. Up close, the makeup made her look almost peaceful, almost, but there was no hiding that faint grayness beneath it all. No concealing the stiffness in the folded hands or the crooked collar someone had tried to straighten. Diane reached out, not touching, just hovering her hand over the wilted flowers pinned to the chest. "Doesn't it bother you?" she asked softly. "The pretending." He didn't look at her when he answered. "It bothers me more to think they'd be gone without ever being seen." The basement hummed around them, lights buzzing, machines ticking softly. It felt less like a room and more like a confession chamber. "And me?" Diane asked. "Why show me this?" He paused, then lifted the faded photograph from the shelf. The young man in the picture, him, years earlier, smiled at the woman beside him. The same woman in the chair now. The green dress had fit her then without needing to be arranged. The flowers on her chest were fresh, not wilted. Her face warm, alive. He handed the picture to Diane, and his voice softened in a way she hadn't heard before. "Because you looked. Most people don't. They walk past the living the same way they walk past the dead." She studied the photo, then the woman before her, so still it was almost a performance of stillness. "You want help?" Diane said. It wasn't a question. "I want a witness," he replied. "Someone who understands what's happening out there. Someone who can see." She thought of the park bench, the library, the bus stop, the indifferent crowds, the steady erosion of attention in a world obsessed with speed and noise. And she thought of herself, 6 years in an apartment no one visited, colleagues who knew her job title but not her voice. "How long will she last?" Diane asked, nodding toward the woman in the green dress. His answer was quiet. "Tomorrow, maybe 2 hours, maybe 6, depends on the crowd." "And what if someone notices right away?" He offered the faintest, sorrowful smile. "Then it means the world is waking up, even a little." Diane handed him back the photograph. His fingers lingered on it, thumb brushing the water-damaged corner like a memory he couldn't quite release. "You don't have to stay," he said. "You can walk out the door right now. Forget all of this. Pretend the world is still the way you want it to be." She looked again at the elderly woman, posed with such careful dignity. A stranger, someone once loved by someone somewhere, even if that love never lasted. "I think," Diane whispered, "the world stopped being the way I wanted it to be a long time ago." The man nodded, as if he'd known she would say that. "I'll pick her up at dawn," he said. "Meet me at the fountain by 7. Diane took a step toward the stairs, but something made her turn back. The woman in the green dress seemed softer in the distance, smaller somehow. Not a body, not a spectacle. Just someone no one came for. "Do they ever get recognized?" she asked quietly. "Anyone ever stop and say they knew them?" For the first time, he looked truly tired. "Once," he said, "a long time ago." "What happened?" His jaw tightened. The woman screamed. People came running. They thought I'd hurt her. They didn't understand. Diane nodded slowly, feeling an odd ache in her chest. She turned toward the stairs. "Tomorrow," he repeated. She didn't say yes, She didn't say no, but she didn't drop the card. And in the quiet of that basement, surrounded by the dead who were waiting to be seen, Diane finally understood the most frightening part. It wasn't the corpses. It was the living, breathing until it became a faint, shallow rhythm, barely a presence at all. She relaxed the muscles in her face until her expression settled into something neutral, unreadable, easily overlooked. She tested shapes with her mouth, adjusted the angle of her chin, softened her gaze until even she couldn't tell what she was feeling. Minutes passed, then more. By the time the bathroom light flickered slightly, a bulb nearing its end, she realized 10 minutes had gone by without a single blink. A strange comfort washed over her. It wasn't death she was practicing. It was disappearance. When she finally lay down, she didn't sleep. Her body understood rest as a choice, not a need. She listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car on the street, the quiet settling of the building. All of it felt muted, as though she were already stepping out of the world she'd always lived in. At 5:42 a.m., Diane rose, washed her face, tied her hair back. Her apartment, plain, sparse, forgettable, looked exactly the same as it had the day before, and yet it felt like she wouldn't be coming back to it. Not really. When the knock came at 6:00 sharp, she was already standing by the door. He didn't greet her with words. He simply stepped aside for her to enter the morning, the quiet street bathed in a thin, gray light. The elderly woman in the green dress was in the back of the van, carefully strapped in so she wouldn't slide during the drive. Diane slid into the passenger seat. The man started the engine. "How long before people arrive?" she asked. "Farmer's market opens at 8, perfect window." As the van moved through empty intersections, he checked the rearview mirror, more out of routine than fear. His movements were efficient practice. She found that she mirrored him, sitting very still, hands resting on her thighs just so, breathing controlled. "You learned quickly," he said. "I've been invisible a long time," she replied. He didn't smile, but something in his posture eased. They parked 2 blocks from the market. The sky was brightening now, soft gold bleeding into pale blue. The air smelled faintly of bread from a nearby bakery, of dew on pavement. He opened the back doors. "Ready?" he asked. Diane nodded. Together they lifted the woman from the van, slowly, gently, as if they were carrying someone asleep rather than someone long gone. The green dress rustled as they positioned her between them, her head resting against Diane's shoulder. The world around them was quiet, unobserved. They wheeled her on a transport dolly concealed beneath a blanket, then positioned her on the bench by the fountain. Families would gather here in a few hours. Children would toss pennies. Vendors would shout about honey and pies, and she would sit through it all, waiting to be seen. Or not. Diane stepped back, observing the placement. The collar needed a slight shift. The flowers could be angled more naturally. The hands should be open, relaxed, not folded. She adjusted each detail with calm precision. She realized this was the first time in years her hands didn't tremble. When she was finished, the woman looked like someone pausing between errands, a grandmother resting after too long in the sun. "Good," the man said softly, "very good." Diane didn't answer. She was watching the scene with the same still, assessing gaze she'd once used on architectural plans. "You stay nearby," he continued. "Blend into the crowd, don't stare, don't interact, just see." She nodded, but her eyes never left the figure on the bench. Then the man placed a hand lightly on Diane's shoulder, not guiding her, not stopping her. Just a moment of contact, acknowledgement, recognition. "You understand why this matters," he said. She did. Because the world had stopped noticing the living long before it stopped noticing the dead. He turned to leave. Diane remained. She watched the woman in the green dress sit perfectly still in the early morning light. She watched the empty plaza breathe itself away. And for the first time, Diane felt a strange sense of belonging here, in this quiet space between the seen and unseen. She wondered how long it would take for someone to notice. She wondered if anyone would. She wondered, just briefly, what it would feel like to sit there herself. A hard line of heat across her knees. Sweat gathered beneath her collar, tracing slow lines down her spine. She ignored it. She ignored everything except the stillness, the cold discipline settling into her bones like a second skeleton. Across the path, a man dropped his coffee. The splash startled a flock of pigeons. People turned, glanced, reacted. But not one person looked at her, not really. They moved around her as if she were a lamppost, a statue, part of the scenery. 3 hours. Her fingers throbbed from holding the book, but she didn't loosen them. Her lower back burned. Her neck begged for relief. She stayed. 4 hours. Children ran past, shouting, laughing, chasing bubbles that trembled in the air. One balloon broke free and drifted toward her. It bumped her leg before floating away. The little girl who'd lost it didn't even glance back. For a moment, Diane felt hollowed out, like the world was brushing against the outer shell of her but never reaching inside. 5 hours. Her vision tunneled. The bench seemed to tilt. A jogger slowed, peered at her, then nodded politely as if she were simply deep in concentration. He never saw the tremor at the corner of her mouth, the strain in her eyes behind the sunglasses. 6 hours. A police cruiser rolled through the park. The officers spoke briefly with a couple who'd lost their dog. One of them scanned the benches, gaze passing over her like wind, present but without recognition. Diane didn't move. She couldn't have if she tried. 7 hours. Her stomach cramped. A bee crawled across her wrist, then wandered onto the edge of the book. She let it explore the pages without flinching, without blinking, without breathing more than the faintest flutter. 8 hours. Someone sat beside her, a teenage boy. He never looked at her, just scrolled his phone, earbuds in, foot tapping to a beat that didn't reach her. He stayed for 15 minutes. Left without noticing she hadn't shifted a single muscle the entire time. 9 hours. Her consciousness began to slip. The sounds of the park blurred into a soft, distant hum. She felt as if she were dissolving, becoming part of the bench, the path, the ordinary afternoon. 10 hours. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched. People thinned. She remained a shape in the fatting light. 11 hours. Finally, someone stopped. A woman with a stroller. She tilted her head, squinting, her brow furrowed. "Are you okay?" Diane didn't speak. The woman took a cautious step closer, reached out, lightly touched Diane's arm. Her skin was cold. That tiny human contact felt like a shock tearing through her stillness. But she didn't move, not yet. She let the woman draw back, hesitate, then hurriedly call someone on her phone. "Hi, yes, I think there's something wrong with her." And just like that, Diane's experiment ended. Footsteps approached several pairs. Voices called out from somewhere behind her. A radio crackled. Someone said, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" And slowly, so slowly, it felt like rising through deep water, Diane turned her head. The world snapped back into motion. She blinked once, the first time all day. The officers froze, startled. The woman with the stroller gasped. Even the child in the stroller made a soft, confused sound. Diane inhaled, a real full breath. It tasted like coming back to life. She looked past the officers, across the park, toward the trees where she knew he was watching. He stood half hidden in the shade, arms crossed, unreadable. But she understood the message in his stillness. She had crossed the threshold. She had proven she could vanish and reappear at will. For the first time in her life, Diane felt seen. Not by the crowd, not by the world, but by someone who understood the strange, quiet power of disappearing. She rose from the bench. Her legs trembled, but she didn't fall. She walked toward him, each step deliberate, carrying the weight of what she'd learned. When she reached him, he whispered, "You lasted longer than any of them." Diane didn't smile, but something deep inside her shifted. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we begin the real work." She nodded, steady and silent. Ready? The shadows between them, every tiny thing felt sharpened, intentional, as if the world itself had started holding its breath with her. 8 hours. The park lights flickered on with a soft hum. Diane felt the glow against her skin, warm in a way the sun no longer was. A couple walked past, laughing quietly, arms linked. The woman glanced at Diane, hesitated for a fraction of a second, that fragile moment where recognition almost breaks through, then kept walking. People never want to disrupt their own peace. They choose comfort over truth, every time. A breeze moved through the trees, lifting a strand of Diane's hair. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. The makeup held, the illusion endured. But the moment the wind settled, she noticed something new. Across the path, just beyond the lamplight, a figure stood completely still. Not watching the ducks, not looking at their phone, not pretending. Watching her. A tall, thin man, hands in his pockets, gaze locked on her with an unsettling calmness, as if he understood exactly what she was doing, as if he had done it before. His head tilted slightly, studying her posture, her stillness, her precision. He knew. Even from where she sat, Diane felt recognition pass between them like a cold draft. He took a step forward, soft, deliberate. Then another. No one else noticed him. No one ever notices the ones who truly look. He stopped just a few feet away, eyes on hers, as if seeing straight through the painted mask and into the real person beneath. "You're good," he said quietly, voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "Better than most." He glanced around the park, checking the angles, the witnesses, the fading light. "But you shouldn't be out here alone." Diane felt her pulse thrum once, the first true movement inside her body in hours. Because the way he said it wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. Their breath inside time itself. Others were simply being kept, maintained in a fragile balance by someone who understood the art too well. And somewhere along the way, the distinction no longer mattered. Not to him, not to the park, and now not to her. A slow, heavy understanding settled over Diane like evening fog. This wasn't a hobby for him, and it wasn't an experiment. It was a community, a quiet, hidden congregation woven into the fabric of a city that never bothered to look closely enough. Silent figures, scattered like stones marking an invisible border. She felt something almost sacred ripple through her chest, Not fear exactly, but recognition, a joining, like she had stepped onto a path others had worn smooth long before her. The man leaned back slightly on the bench, relaxed, as if her awakening pleased him. "You see them now," he murmured. Diane nodded once stiffly. "I didn't understand how many." "There are more in other parks," he said, voice calm, almost tender. "Transit stations, libraries, malls, anywhere people assume stillness equals safety." He turned toward her. "You'd be surprised how many want to disappear without leaving." She felt her breath draw in shallow, controlled, a remnant of the discipline she built through the hours. "And the others?" she asked quietly. "The ones who didn't choose?" His smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of cool, clinical calculation. "They don't suffer," he said. "They simply become part of the landscape. People stop noticing the difference." Diane looked again at the three figures. The old man's chest wasn't rising. The young woman's head sat at an angle no living neck would hold for long. The middle-aged man's hand had slipped an inch from where the rigger had positioned it. Yet they still blended perfectly into the world. A world that wanted not to see. And now Diane understood her place in it, what he was offering. Not power, not escape. Something older, something that resonated with that deep, ancient human instinct to step out of the noise and into the quiet where no one expects anything from you. "Come tomorrow," he said softly, standing. "Before dawn, there's more to learn." He stepped away, blending easily with the drifting crowd, as if he'd never been there at all. Diane sat there a moment longer, feeling the weight of stillness not as a burden, but a belonging. Then slowly, deliberately, she practiced again, one breath, one blink, and then nothing at all. Becoming part of the world that no one sees. March, her copy worn from years of handling, its spine cracked in the same places as the one she'd first seen in the woman's motionless hands. She opened it, found a page at random, and let her index finger rest lightly against the margin. Then she stilled. The library was quiet in the way old places are quiet, not silent, but layered with soft echoes, footsteps, whispers, pages turning. Diane let those sounds wash over her, not reacting, not responding. She let her breath thin until she barely felt it. Her reflection in the study room window didn't blink. This was easier now, too easy. Her body knew the posture, the emptiness, the gentle slide out of presence and into that other space. People trickled in. Students, retirees, a mother with a toddler tugging at her sleeve. Chairs scraped, laptops opened, someone sneezed. The world continued as if she weren't sitting there dissolving into the air. 30 minutes. 1 hour. 2. A librarian passed her, pushing a cart of returns. His eyes drifted across her without stopping, the way one looks at furniture. She didn't shift when a strand of hair fell across her cheek. She let it cling there like a loose thread. By hour 3, the ache had become familiar, a companion. She welcomed it. Pain meant she was still anchored, but barely. On hour 4, someone finally noticed. A teenage girl slowed near the table, her gaze lingering. She frowned, stood still for a moment, tilted her head. Diane felt the weight of that curiosity like a fingertip tracing the edge of a bruise. Then the moment Diane had been waiting for. The girl whispered something to her friend. "Is she asleep?" "No, she's reading." "But she hasn't moved." The friend shrugged. Some people concentrate weird. And they left. Diane's pulse slowed again. Another near recognition, another almost intervention. The line held. But something else happened, something she hadn't expected. Across the room, behind the genealogy shelves, a man sat perfectly still, too still. Diane's senses sharpened. She recognized the posture, the slight forward tilt, the fixed eyes, the hands resting on a closed paperback. Another practitioner, another maintained figure, or another who had crossed. This one she hadn't been told about. A ripple of cold moved through her. She scanned the library slowly, letting her eyes drift without moving her head. And there, near the periodicals, an older woman sat with a knitting project frozen mid-stitch. The yarn hung slack between her fingers, unmoving. 2, 3, if she counted the man by the window whose coffee had gone cold an hour ago. This wasn't training. This was placement. The library was becoming like the park, a curated landscape of stillness. And for the first time, Diane wondered if she was being shaped into something more than a participant, more than a student, a caretaker, a maintainer, a curator of those who'd stepped too far into the quiet. When the man finally appeared, emerging from between the stacks as if he'd simply been shelved there, he didn't speak. He stood at the end of her table, waiting. Diane didn't break posture. At last he leaned down, voice barely a murmur. 4 hours, good, but one of them needs adjustment, come. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly around the book. This was the next step. Not learning to disappear. Learning to keep the disappeared in place. Slowly, Diane closed her book, the motion precise and silent. She rose from the chair, feeling her legs tremble with the residue of stillness. And she followed him deeper into the stacks, toward the man with the cold coffee, toward whatever responsibility came next. But this time, there would be no experiment, no mentor waiting nearby, no carefully staged retreat from the brain. Diane would walk to the park alone, moving with the slow certainty of someone returning to a place they had always belonged. She'd sit on the same bench where the first woman had been found, the book open in her hands, her finger resting against the familiar margin of page 47. And she would let herself drift. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but gently like a candle burning itself down. Her breaths would thin until they became mere suggestions. Her pulse would fade until even she could no longer feel it. Her eyes would soften, unfocused, settling into that perfect stillness she had practiced for months. Around her, life would continue its noiseless choreography. The jogger, the mother with the stroller, the old man with the dog, people moving past her, brushing the edges of her presence without ever truly entering it. They'd see the shape of a woman reading and their minds would fill in the rest, because it was easier than considering the truth. Hours would pass. Afternoon would dissolve into gold, gold into gray. The lamp posts would buzz to life, and still she would hold her place. Her body would cool. Her stillness would deepen. A fly would land on the page, crawl across the word men's, then lift off again, unbothered. Somewhere across the park, one of the others, one of the maintained, would turn their head a millimeter too far, and the man who tended them would quietly stand to adjust their position. He might glance toward Diane, recognizing what she had chosen, acknowledging her in the only way their world allowed. And the crowds would keep walking. Someone would notice eventually, a child probably, or a dog, or a student with a too curious gaze, someone who hadn't yet learned the adult habit of looking without seeing. They'd approach cautiously. Mom, she's not moving. And the mother, or the jogger, or the officer on his rounds would bend closer, and that breathless moment would arrive. the one where recognition finally pierced the veil. The ambulance would come too late. The man with the notebook would watch from a distance, not interfering this time, because this hadn't been an accident. It had been Diane's final act of discipline, her final offering to the stillness she had chased for so long. By then, the park would have one more figure added to its quiet constellation. Another life paused in the thin space between being and not being. Another reminder that sometimes the invisible don't disappear. They simply stop pretending they're here. And the world, busy and distracted, walks past. Story 2, something smiled with his mouth. The Sunrise Memory Care Facility sat on the eastern edge of Gallup, New Mexico, pressed against the desert like something trying not to be noticed. During the day, the place felt harmless enough. Faded murals of sunsets, plastic cacti in the lobby, country music drifting from ancient speakers. But after midnight, everything changed. The silence became thicker. The hallways seemed longer, as if they were stretching themselves in the dark. And the residents, sweet, confused, fatting souls, sometimes said things that Laura tried very hard not to think about later. Ward 7 had 12 rooms, 12 quiet, dimly lit cells where the forgotten lived out their last bewildered years. Laura made her rounds with the soft-footed caution of someone entering a church or a mausoleum. She checked vitals. She adjusted blankets. She whispered comfort into ears that rarely remembered her face. Room 7C was always last. Not because she was afraid, at least, that's what she told herself, but because Mr. Elijah Parker made her uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. He was a small man, bird-like, mostly silent. His chart listed advanced Alzheimer's, severe aphasia, and occasional non-responsive periods. Harmless on paper, but there was something wrong with his smile. He was sitting upright when she entered. He always was, as if he'd been waiting. The overhead lamp flickered, dim, then steady. Laura's skin prickled. "Evening, Elijah," she said softly, shining her penlight toward his pupils the way she'd done for weeks now. His eyes didn't track her. They focused somewhere just past her shoulder. "Are you cold?" she asked, adjusting the thin blanket around his legs. His skin felt like warm paper, too thin, too fragile. And then he smiled. Not a big smile, not even a friendly one. It was a small curve of the lips, subtle, restrained, but it wasn't his smile. Because the smile didn't reach his eyes. Because his eyes were still locked on something behind her. Because the corners of his mouth twitched upward in a way no human mouth naturally moved. Too slow, too deliberate, as if something inside his skin were adjusting the muscles with unfamiliar hands. Laura froze. "Elijah," she whispered. His mouth opened. Not wide, just enough. Just enough that she saw his tongue move like it was remembering how. Just enough that she saw he wasn't breathing. "Elijah, are you?" His jaw clicked sharply, like someone cracking a knuckle. Then he spoke. His voice was wrong, too deep, too calm, too certain. "He sees you now." Laura's breath hitched. She turned slowly, terrified of what she might find behind her. But there was nothing. Just the doorway, just the hallway, just the hum of fluorescent lights. When she looked back at Elijah, he was no longer smiling. His head had slumped forward. His chest rose and fell again in weak, fragile breaths. As if nothing had happened. As if she'd imagined the whole thing. But she hadn't. Because as she backed out of the room, she caught a glimpse of something impossible, just for a second, in the polished metal of the doorframe. A second smile behind her. A smile with no face. A smile that didn't belong to anyone alive. And it disappeared the moment she blinked. She didn't finish her rounds that night. She went to the nurse's station, sat down, and tried to steady her breathing. Tried to tell herself the isolation of night shifts was finally catching up. Tried to remember the grounding techniques her therapist had taught her after the medication incident. But the hallway outside Ward 7 stayed unnervingly silent. Until from somewhere down the corridor, she heard it. A soft, wet clicking, like someone practicing how to move their mouth. And then, lightly, distantly, a voice that did not belong to any of her residents. "Laura, I can smile with your mouth too." Toward them, but just enough that Laura felt the weight of his gaze slice through the glass. His eyes weren't empty, they were fixed, tracking something beyond the room, something she couldn't see. She shivered, though the night was warm and still. "Don't touch anything," Deson whispered, almost to herself, before walking away. Laura didn't move, couldn't move, her pulse throbbing in her temples. The hum of the fluorescent lights above became a low vibration that matched the thrum of her fear. The first night she had to check on him alone, she brought her notebook, pretending to write vitals and sleep patterns. But every time she looked at him, her pen hovered, useless. Hostin Yazi's head tilted slightly toward her, as if aware that she was recording him, aware that she was trying to categorize his silence, his stillness. She imagined his mind whirring behind that blank stare, a predator packing the boundaries of her imagination. By the second week, she'd noticed patterns. He never left the chair. He never blinked at normal intervals. Sometimes she'd swear his lips moved when no sound followed. Sometimes she'd catch a faint, almost imperceptible twitch, his hand, a finger curling or stretching as if practicing something. She asked the other night nurse about it. "They've seen it," the nurse said quietly, glancing down the corridor. "Other patients, staff, but it's best not to ask." And now, 3 weeks in, she knew why. Tonight, like every night, she entered room 714 with a flashlight in her hand, clipboard tucked under her arm, pretending routine. The man sat perfectly upright in the same chair, his back straight, shoulders square, head angled like a sculpture carved from patience and menace. The shadows of the lamp stretched across his face, highlighting the hollows of his cheeks and the unnatural sharpness of his jawline. Laura cleared her throat. "Mr. Yazi, checking vitals," she said. His head tilted just slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward her voice. And then she noticed it. The first hint of movement where there should have been none. The corners of his mouth curled upward. Not a smile, not exactly, but the prelude to one. It was deliberate, too precise, and wrong in a way that felt like ice against her spine. Laura's hands went numb on the clipboard. She tried to step back. The door clicked softly behind her, though she hadn't moved. The man's eyes followed, slowly, intently. Then the smile widened. Teeth, yellow but perfectly aligned, flashed under the harsh fluorescent light. It wasn't friendly. It was an assessment, a recognition of her presence. And as she watched, frozen, she realized he wasn't just smiling at her. He was smiling with her. His mouth shifted as if pulling the contours of her face into its shape. Subtle, nearly imperceptible at first. She touched her jaw. It was real. She could feel the movement beneath her skin. Something in the air changed then. The humming of the fluorescent lights deepened, filling the room with a resonance that pressed against her eardrums. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell someone, but her voice had disappeared, swallowed by the presence of him. And then a whisper, so faint she almost doubted it. "You're learning." Her breath caught. She didn't know if it came from him, from her mind, or from the space between them where reason and fear had dissolved. The night stretched on. She could feel the shape of her own mouth shifting, mimicking, following the impossible pattern of his. Somewhere deep inside, she knew it was only a matter of time before she became part of whatever he was, part of the room's rhythm, part of the stillness that swallowed attention whole. And Laura understood, suddenly, irrevocably, that no one had ever seen him for what he really was, and maybe tonight she never would either. Mobility, he rarely stood without assistance, his muscles stiff from years of disuse. Yet here he was, upright, body rigid, eyes fixed on the parking lot beyond the glass. His growl had softened now, almost a purr, but it vibrated with the same unsettling intent as before. Laura's pulse spiked. She leaned closer to the window, careful not to startle him, and noticed something she hadn't before. His shadow stretched long across the floor, distorted and jagged, almost like it had a life of its own. The corners of his mouth twitched, not in confusion, not in the random spasms typical of dementia, but in a deliberate, controlled manner. He was aware, too aware. The growl shifted into something else, almost a whisper, a sound that seemed to crawl along the edges of the room and coil around her senses. Laura froze, her hands gripping the frame of the window as if it were a lifeline. Then she saw it, a movement in the reflection of the glass behind him. Not his own, but another presence, subtle, almost imperceptible. A shadow that mirrored his stance, but slightly delayed like an echo with intent. Laura, a voice rasped from somewhere deep in her mind rather than through the room. She staggered back, clutching her chest. The sound was his, but not spoken aloud. It was as if he could reach into her thoughts, threading them like a needle through fabric. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment the ward seemed to stretch, corridors elongating into impossible angles. Hostin Yazzi's eyes locked on hers, unblinking, and the faintest hint of a smile curled at the corners of his lips, controlled, precise, knowing. Laura realized then, in a cold, creeping clarity, that he hadn't been a patient at all in the way the charts described. He had been waiting, observing, learning the rhythms of the ward and its inhabitants, and now he was reaching out, testing her. Every instinct screamed to run, to alert someone, but her legs refused to move. Her mind slowed, stretched thin, every thought echoing in the oppressive stillness of the ward. The low hum of the fluorescent lights deepened, vibrating through the walls, through her bones, synchronizing with the low, calculated growl of the man who was no longer merely a patient. And then he stepped toward her, slowly, deliberately, not with the unsteady shuffle of someone frail, but with the measured confidence of someone fully in command of his body, his space, and disturbingly, perhaps even hers. Laura knew with a sudden, unbearable certainty that this night would not end in the usual way, and whatever Hostin Yazzi truly was, whatever he had become in the shadowed corners of his mind, she was about to become part of it. Arms and legs. It was unnatural. Years of documented frailty and dependence should have made even a simple pivot a struggle. Yet he obeyed her touch, stepping back from the window and lowering himself into the chair with controlled precision. Laura pulled up a stool beside him, trying to mask her unease. "It's all right, Hostin. Nothing's out there now." She spoke softly, the way one might address a frightened animal, but he didn't respond verbally. Instead, his eyes, sharp, predatory, followed her every movement, tracking her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. The room returned to its usual quiet, but it was charged now, like the calm before a storm. Laura checked his vitals, all within normal ranges. and yet the tension in his muscles and the lingering aura in the room suggested something beyond physical. She felt it too, a subtle, insistent awareness that she was being measured, assessed, not just by Hostin, but by whatever he had drawn into this space. Then he did something entirely unexpected. Slowly, deliberately, Hostin tilted his head back and opened his mouth. Not a growl this time, not a word, just a smile. A smile that stretched impossibly wide, showing teeth that caught the harsh fluorescent light, unnatural in its perfection. Laura froze. It was the kind of smile no dementia patient could form, a conscious expression of awareness, of intent, something that should not have been possible. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The stillness in the ward pressed in on her. Every other patient, every machine, fading to a muted background. All that remained was Hostin Yazzie, the faint echo of that low growl vibrating in her chest, and that impossible, knowing smile. She realized in that instant that the stories, the charts, the careful distances they'd all maintained, none of it mattered. This man, or whatever he had become, had crossed into something else entirely. And whatever he saw in her now, behind the nurse's eyes and the trained routines, would not let her go. The fluorescent glow of the night lights made the ward feel unreal, casting every corner in sharp, cold clarity. Laura moved cautiously back to room 714, her hands steady but her chest tight with unease. Hostin Yazzie sat in his chair, unnaturally upright, the thin hospital gown clinging to his frame. Heat radiated from his skin, a subtle but undeniable warning that something had stirred beneath the surface. She eased him back, ran her hands over his arms to assess tension, and checked the vitals she had memorized from years of experience. Blood pressure climbing, heart rate elevated, a temperature that flirted with fever, but nothing catastrophic. Her tablet recorded the numbers, each tap a methodical reassurance to herself that everything was under control. And yet, the memory of movement outside the window lingered, the shadow, the silent precision of something that had crossed the boundary from wilderness into the human world. She returned to the nurse's station to document the event, her notes precise. Coyote sighting, patient agitation, potential risks. Protocol demanded it. Coyotes could carry disease, could grow bold if they felt safe near people. Every precaution mattered. Hector, the night security guard, glanced up when she called him. He was a man of habits, phone games, monitors, the hum of security feeds. He raised an eyebrow, mildly impressed. Coyotes rarely came so close to the building. Hungry, maybe, he speculated, but Laura couldn't shake the memory of its deliberate steps, each movement measured, intentional, not searching for scraps, searching for him, Hostin Yazzie. She shook her head, a tension in her jaw. 3 weeks of continuous night shifts had to be clouding her judgment. Patterns emerged where none existed, connections imagined. Coyotes were wild, unpredictable creatures. Hostin Yazzie was a patient with dementia, restless and sometimes agitated. Nothing more. It had to be coincidence. But logic offered no comfort. Her eyes kept drifting to room 714, to the darkness beyond the glass, to the patient whose gaze remained fixed as if anchored to some unseen point outside the mundane. And then the sound, a low, resonant growl, rolling through him like a distant storm, made her pause, hand hovering over her tablet, breath caught halfway between normalcy and alarm. When the day's shift arrived, Laura gave her report to Bate, a veteran nurse whose calm exterior belied a sharp awareness honed over a decade. She recounted the incident, careful to stick to facts. Elevated vitals, unusual agitation, coyote near the perimeter. Bate listened, eyes narrowing subtly at the last detail. "The third sighting this month," Bate murmured almost to herself. Always at night, always the same spot. Laura felt a chill creep up her spine. Wildlife authorities had checked last week. No dens, no food sources, nothing that explained the repeated appearances. Coyotes didn't normally approach human structures, especially ones so active and lit. Yet here it was, a creature that seemed to understand more than its instincts should allow, returning night after night, drawn to something or someone at the edge of the wall. Laura left the handover with a lingering unease. She knew the patterns she had dismissed were too precise to ignore. Something was waiting out there, watching, calculating. And whatever it was, it had already found the one it sought. The memory of that gaze from Hostin Yazzie haunted her. The intensity, the unblinking focus, the way he had reacted not as a patient, but as a sentinel aware of what prowled just beyond the glass. Laura couldn't explain it. She couldn't rationalize it. And yet, she knew she would never stop watching, never stop listening, and never ignore the space where something wild had crossed into their world. They always came back. Laura and Bate walked together down the quiet corridor toward room 714 for the morning handoff. Hostin Yazzie remained in his usual place, perched rigidly before the window as the first gray light of dawn crept over the horizon. In the soft morning glow, he looked smaller, fragile, more like the man the charts describe, an aging body struggling to sustain a mind that no longer fully remembered itself. Bates spoke quietly, keeping her tone neutral. His daughter visits Saturdays, quiet, patient, tried to bring him home once years ago, but he was too much. She hesitated, glancing at Laura. Nearly broke her arm. That's when the state stepped in, deemed him too dangerous for home care. Laura studied him, tracing the frail lines of his arms, the slight curve of his spine, trying to reconcile the weak figure before her with the memory of violence described in the reports. He seemed incapable of anything beyond sitting, breathing, existing. Yet Bates' expression had sharpened, guarded. His daughter had brought someone with her, Bate continued. A man from church, I think. Hostin, he went after him like something not human. The report called it feral. Feral. The word lodged itself in Laura's mind during the drive through Gallup's waking streets. Feral. Stripped of humanity, leaving only a raw, untamed force lurking beneath the skin of the old man. Back in her apartment, a small studio on the third floor of a repurposed motor lodge, Laura sank into the dim, musty room. 2 suitcases, a blacked-out window, a bed smelling faintly of old carpet and fried takeout from below. She had moved in with nothing but determination and avoidance, learning to sleep through traffic, arguments, and life pressing from every side. That morning, exhaustion did not bring rest. Her mind replayed the coyote at the parking lot's edge, Hostin's low, resonant growl and the haunting syllable, feral. She drifted into uneasy sleep, a dream of running through darkness clinging to her, hands scraping over rough earth, feet pounding a ground that might swallow her, a gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food. She awoke mid-afternoon, still tethered to the dream, haunted by a sense that something vital had slipped from her grasp. Coffee in hand, leftover takeout consumed at the counter, she scrolled through her phone, attempting to distract the mounting tension in her chest. The hours dissolved, and the weight in her stomach tightened as she started the drive back to sunrise, aware that the night, and whatever waited there, would demand all of her attention once more. Through the fading light of November, the desert stretched wide, shadows long and molten under the dying sun, and Laura's eyes kept flicking to the roadside, scanning for any sign of movement. A silhouette, four-legged and deliberate, stalking along the asphalt. Her second night unfolded like the first, but now there was anticipation. a tense expectation that coiled in her chest. At 1:23 a.m., she arrived at room 714. Hostin Yazzie was already at the window, pressed close to the glass, that low, vibrating growl thrumming from deep in his chest. And there it was again, the coyote, tracing the same path along the edge of the parking lot, eyes locked on the old man. Laura lingered in the doorway, feeling the weight of the moment. There was a rhythm to it, almost ceremonial, something far beyond chance. The coyote circled the lot with deliberate grace, pausing to fix its gaze on the window. Hostin's growl swelled, reverberating against the glass, and for the barest instant, a heartbeat. She thought she saw the creature bare its teeth, but it was something more than a snarl, something that carried intent, maybe even communication. Then it vanished, dissolving into the darkness beyond the lights. When Laura stepped closer to check on Hostin, he shifted his head slightly toward her. Not fully, not meeting her gaze, but enough to feel like acknowledgement. A rare flicker of recognition that made the room heavier, quieter. His eyes were deep black in the dim light, void of reflection, yet in them she caught a flicker of awareness, a deliberate observation that defied every expectation about his condition. She guided him back to his chair and ran through her checks. Temperature 102 degrees. Than before, enough to keep a careful watch but not enough to trigger alarms. Heart rate normalized, and then her gaze fell to his hands. They should have betrayed him, trembling like most patients at his stage. Yet they were steady, precise, resting elegantly on the chair arms, fingers long and controlled, as though some part of him remained untouched by decay. Laura recorded everything: the coyote, the subtle anomalies, the temperature, the heartbeat, the impossibly calm hands. She filed her report with Hector, who this time listened with a thread of seriousness, promising to alert wildlife services once more. Something was drawing that animal here, something specific. And Laura felt it too. Whatever tethered the coyote to this place, to Hostin Yazzie, it was beyond reason, beyond explanation, but undeniably real. Was fitted with extra locks and sensors, and staff were warned to monitor him constantly. But what struck Laura now wasn't the locks or the security, it was the behavior itself. The growl, the strength, the focus. Something in those notes mirrored what she'd been witnessing nightly. That same unwavering attention, that same unyielding presence. Not confusion, not random agitation, purpose. The following night she arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared for the shift. Room 714 was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. Hostin Yazzie was already at the window, eyes fixed on the black horizon, fingers curled lightly on the sill. Laura didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply watched. Minutes stretched into hours. Then, just after 12:30 a.m., movement at the edge of the parking lot caught her eye. A shadow glided along the perimeter, sleek, deliberate, utterly unhurried. The kite. It moved with a strange intelligence, weaving between light and dark as though following an invisible map. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the dimness, locked on the window where Hostin stood. And Hostin growled, low, resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the bones of the building itself. The coyote paused, lifting its head, ears pointed, lips curling in a silent mimicry of the old man's sound. Laura felt the hair on her arms rise. It wasn't mimicry, it was recognition. For the next hour, the silent vigil continued. Laura couldn't look away, couldn't breathe too loudly. She felt the energy in the room, thick and electric, a tension that seemed to connect the old man and the wild animal across that stretch of asphalt and light. And then, as quietly as it had appeared, the coyote retreated, slipping into the darkness beyond the lot. Hostin's growl faded, but his posture remained taut, alert, as if he was still waiting for something she couldn't see. Laura stepped closer, checking his vitals with deliberate calm, but her mind spun. She documented temperature, pulse, every minor anomaly, but the truth was bigger than any measurement. This wasn't just a patient having an episode. This was a connection, something ancient and inexplicable, a silent understanding between two beings who shouldn't have any reason to acknowledge each other at all. And for the first time, Laura realized she wasn't just observing. She was part of it, witnessing, bearing silent witness to a pattern older than her comprehension, a story playing out in the cold desert night, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her that the coyote would return. Again, always. Not to the building, not to the lights, but to him. To Hostin Yazy, the old man at the window, waiting for something only he could see. Of someone carrying too much worry to fully register new people. Her eyes, though, were unmistakably alert, watchful, scanning the hallway with the kind of focus that suggested she was used to reading not just rooms, but the intentions of anyone who entered them. Laura followed her into room 714, trying to appear casual while studying the interactions. Hostin Yazy sat in his usual place, back straight, hands folded over the armrests, eyes sharp despite the haze of dementia. He didn't growl this time, but there was a tension in the set of his jaw, a coiled anticipation that made the hair on Laura's arms rise. Della began speaking softly, her voice a careful thread weaving through the room. She told him she'd brought his clothes, some familiar items from home, small comforts he might recognize. She spoke for a few minutes, her words gentle but firm, as if guiding him through a memory only he could access. And then something subtle shifted. His eyes flicked toward the window. Not as a patient lost in fog, not as a man drifting through confusion, but as someone aware, calculating, connected to something beyond her understanding. Laura's pulse quickened. She remembered the coyote, the ritual at the edge of the parking lot, the way it seemed drawn only to him. And now, watching this exchange, she realized she was witnessing the origin point of the connection, the catalyst for the nightly visits she had been observing for weeks. Della left the room after 20 minutes, her hands lingering on the back of his chair, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Hostin remained at the window a moment longer, then turned slowly toward Laura, his gaze steady, not empty, not vacant, watching, waiting. That night when Laura returned for her shift, everything was the same, and yet it was different. She took her place at the nurse's station, heart hammering, eyes on room 714. Midnight came, then 12:30. The lights flickered faintly over the parking lot, and like clockwork, the shadow appeared, moving with that eerie deliberation along the perimeter. The coyote paused at the corner closest to the building, eyes locking onto the window. Hostin's growl rose again, resonant, unyielding, a sound that seemed to bridge the distance between them, across asphalt, air, and understanding. Laura felt the weight of it in her chest, in her bones, a recognition that she could neither name nor ignore. This was more than coincidence, more than wildlife behavior, more than dementia. Something had awakened that September day, something old and stubborn, a thread connecting man and beast, memory and instinct. And Laura understood with a mixture of awe and dread that she was now part of the story unfolding, one night at a time, as the desert dark watched over them all. Laura didn't interrupt. The weight of Della's words lingered between them, heavy enough to make the quiet lounge feel smaller, as if the walls were leaning in to listen. The desert beyond the window stretched wide and empty, but in that moment it felt alive, like something out there was waiting for its name to be spoken. Della exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on a distant point only she could see. "I don't think my father is one of them," she said, her voice threaded with exhaustion and fear. I don't believe that, I can't, but other people did. People in Shiprock whispered about him, said he knew things he shouldn't know, said he crossed places where no one walked. Her hands tightened around the edge of her bag, and when the dementia started, when he began losing pieces of himself, I started wondering if maybe it wasn't just illness. Maybe it was something old, something he fought for years finally catching up to him. Laura felt a gentle ache in her chest. Stories like these, passed down, half believed, half feared, always carried a truth beneath the superstition, even if you couldn't name it. She worked long enough in memory care to see how the past clung to people, how belief became as real as bone when the mind weakened. But this was different. This wasn't the trembling memory of a patient. This was the conviction of a daughter who had lived with something unspoken her entire life. Dela swallowed hard. The man I brought with me that day, he wasn't a spiritual advisor, not really. He was someone who knew how to close things, to make sure spirits that didn't belong stayed where they were supposed to. She looked at Laura then, truly looked, as if deciding whether to trust her with the last piece of the truth. But when he saw my father, he wouldn't go near him, said something was already attached, something he couldn't remove. The room felt colder. Laura's mind drifted back to Hostinyazi standing at the window, eyes dark and unblinking. His steady hands, his growl low, deliberate, unlike any human sound she'd ever heard. And the coyote appearing every night, packing like a sentry or a mourner or something else entirely. What does the coyote want? Laura asked softly. Dela closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they glistened with a truth she had spent years refusing to face. In our stories, she said, a coyote doesn't come to the door of a dying man unless it's waiting for something to end or something to begin. A shiver climbed down Laura's spine, steady and deliberate. The desert outside was silent, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt watchful. And for the first time, Laura wondered whether the coyote wasn't here for Hostinyazi, but here to make sure something inside him didn't walk out. Dela's hands trembled slightly, though her grip on Laura's was firm, unyielding. Her eyes, sharp and unblinking, held a weight that made the quiet lounge feel suffocating. You don't understand, she said, voice low, urgent, as if the walls themselves might overhear. This isn't just illness. This is something else. She leaned back, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. I've seen it with my own eyes. Nights when he disappears, when I think he's gone to the desert, but it's not him. Not entirely. Something moves in his place, something foreign. Laura listened, the chill of unease curling through her chest. Dela continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. When the dementia came, he didn't just forget, he fought. Like he knew that losing his mind meant losing more than memory, losing himself. And in September, I finally convinced a Hatali, a medicine man, a cousin's son, to come. We thought maybe he could help, maybe restore some part of my father, bring him back. Her fingers knotted together tightly as she recounted it. He performed the prayers, traditional ones, and for a moment he woke, eyes sharp, aware, and terrified. He tried to tell us something, but the words, they wouldn't come. Just gestures, frantic pointing at his chest, sounds that weren't quite human. And then he attacked. We barely got out. Laura felt the air grow heavier, colder, as Dela pressed on. The Hatali said my father isn't my father anymore. Something has been wearing him, hiding beneath his skin for years. Dementia isn't destroying him. It's holding something in place, something trapped, something not human. And it's clever, desperate. Dela's voice dropped to a whisper, yet each syllable carried a weight that pressed against Laura's chest. The medicine man said he'd come back. He'll bring what? needed to release it to free the human buried underneath. He said he'll come at night in the shape he needs to take, a coyote, and we cannot interfere. The words lingered, heavy, unbroken, as if the room itself had folded around them. Delaz's gaze pierced Laura, raw and urgent. It's weak, but smart. It will look for someone to help it, someone tired, someone alone, someone who needs to fix things. Don't let it choose you. Her grip on Laura's hand tightened, a silent plea embedded in bone and muscle. And then, as quickly as it had come, she let go, standing with the grace of someone who had carried too much for too long. She went on to visit her father, performing the ritual of her weekly pilgrimage, emerging each time with the same hollow relief and mounting dread. Outside, the parking lot lay empty and quiet, the desert beyond vast and watching. And somewhere in the darkness, the coyote waited, patient, vigilant, a shadow tethered to the human and the inhuman alike, circling the thin boundary between what is and what must be. Her arms as she crouched behind a low wall at the edge of the parking lot. The coyote hadn't moved. It was waiting, perfectly still, eyes locked on the window like a sentinel guarding some secret she didn't yet understand. Hostin Yazi's growl rolled up through the building, low and resonant, a vibration she could feel in her chest, as if the room itself were alive with something watching, something aware. Laura crept closer, each step measured, careful not to break the fragile tension. The desert was silent beyond the lot, the only sound the faint hum of the security lights overhead. Her pulse raced, her mind spinning through everything Delaz had said, about the trapped presence, about the coyote as a form the medicine man would take, about the human buried beneath years of deception and dementia. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But she couldn't deny the pattern, the precision in the animal's movements, the way it had been returning night after night for weeks. She stopped 10 feet from the coyote, heart hammering. Its eyes shimmered in the glare of the lot lights, unblinking, intelligent. Laura realized she could almost see what it was waiting for, that it wasn't hunting. It was watching, waiting, bound to something or someone inside the building. Laura drew a slow breath and stepped forward again. I'm not going to hurt you, she whispered, mostly to herself, mostly to break the tension coiling around her spine. The coyote didn't flinch, didn't move. It was a presence, not an animal, not a threat in the usual sense, just an observer, guardian, messenger. The growl inside the building shifted, responding to the air, to her presence, to something she could not name. Laura's gaze flicked to the window. Hostin Yazi pressed his palms flat against the glass, fingers splayed like claws, eyes dark and unreadable. For the first time, it seemed, he acknowledged her. Not recognition, not welcome, but awareness. He was aware of her choice, of the risk she had just taken, and perhaps of what had been waiting for him all these years. The coyote stepped closer, still, deliberate, until it was only a few paces from her. Its eyes held a warning, a calculation, something that transcended instinct. Laura froze, feeling the weight of centuries of desert and silence pressing down on her. This was no longer about a wild animal or a frail man with dementia. This was about a threshold she had crossed, a line between human and something older, something that had been held in place by time, memory, and ritual. She crouched lower, exhaling slowly, every nerve taut. The growl deepened, resonant, vibrating through the lot, through her bones. Laura knew she had a choice. Step back and let the pattern continue, or step forward and face whatever had been waiting for 5 long years. Somewhere inside her, in that cold November air, she felt the pull of something immense, something that would not forgive hesitation. The coyote's lips curled, a subtle shift that could have been a snarl or a signal. Its gaze flicked once toward the back doors, once toward the building, and then back at her. Laura's fingers tightened around the key ring. She had already decided. Whatever waited in room 714, whatever secret had been bound by locks and walls and fear, she was going to see it through. And in that moment she understood. There was no turning back. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she stepped into the open expanse of the parking lot, the night air biting at her skin beneath her scrubs. Somewhere in the black beyond the glow of the building, it waited, a presence that made every instinct in her body scream. She moved forward cautiously, each footfall loud in the hushed desert stillness. Behind her, the facility loomed like a watchful sentinel, its windows glowing faintly, casting the faintest light across the asphalt. Alone, she felt painfully exposed, a tiny human figure standing between the sterile safety of fluorescent light and the endless darkness beyond. Then it emerged from the shadows, the coyote, larger than she had imagined, its coat silvered by the dim light, shoulders broad and deliberate, eyes glinting with something ancient, something that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 nights. It regarded her calmly, its gaze unreadable, somewhere between exhaustion and expectation. 10 feet apart, woman and beast stood in a frozen, impossible tableau. She realized how absurd it all was, how irrational. A nurse, alone, facing a creature of the wild because of a grieving daughter's warnings in the dead hours of the night. And yet the coyote moved not like a predator but like a sentinel. It sank to the ground, resting in a sphinx-like pose, never breaking eye contact, waiting, as though she had a role in something she could not yet comprehend. And without thinking, words slipped from her lips. If you're here to help, know this. He's protected. He can't be harmed. The doors are locked. The windows secure. Nothing can reach him. The creature's ears flicked toward her, then back to the building, to the glowing window of room 714, where a dark shape pressed against the glass. Laura's voice grew firmer. He's sick. He's trapped in a failing body. But whatever you think you need to do, he doesn't deserve more pain. For a moment, she realized she was defending him not for superstition, not for fear, but because care had become a part of her. Because even in his fractured state, he was still human. The coyote rose slowly, fluid and deliberate, but it did not advance. Instead, it turned, moving back into the blackness, unhurried, purposeful. After a few steps, it paused, its gaze locking on her. In that instant, she swore she glimpsed something unmistakably human in its expression. Tired, frustrated, sorrowful, carrying centuries of weariness. Then it vanished, dissolving into the night as though it had never been there at all, leaving Laura trembling in the cold, aware she had witnessed something that defied reason, and yet somehow felt entirely real. Oozing faintly along its muzzle and paws. Its fur was matted from the struggle, but its eyes burned with the same intense focus Laura had seen before. The low, rumbling growl escaped its throat, vibrating through the room, resonating in her chest. Laura froze for a heartbeat, torn between fear and instinct. This was no longer a distant visitor. It had breached the barrier meant to keep chaos at bay. She radioed security, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. Room 714, window compromised. We need immediate assistance. The coyote shifted, its weight pressing against the jagged edges of glass and metal. Yet even in its aggression, there was a strange precision in its movement, as if it knew exactly what it was doing, exactly why it was there. Hostin Yazzie remained in his chair, palms flat against the inner pane, growling back at the animal, eyes dark and unwavering. It was a confrontation older than time itself, a silent understanding played out between human and beast. Within moments, Hector arrived, flashlight cutting through the darkness, shouting commands, calling for backup. Laura stayed at the edge of the room, heart hammering, as the staff scrambled to contain the situation. The coyote didn't flee or attack the humans. It focused solely on Hostin-Yazzie, circling the broken window like a guardian possessed, a ritual in motion she couldn't yet comprehend. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the animal leapt, back through the opening it had carved, disappearing into the desert night, leaving shards of glass behind and a strange silence that felt heavier than before. Laura exhaled shakily, eyes drawn to Hostin-Yazzie, whose chest heaved with the intensity of the encounter, hands still pressed to the window. The growl had ceased, replaced by a stillness that felt like a fragile truce. For the first time, Laura understood the truth that Dela had whispered weeks ago. This was no ordinary animal. It was something ancient, deliberate, bound by a purpose she couldn't fully articulate. And Hostin-Yazzie, he was not just a man trapped in a failing body. There was something inside him, something aware, something waiting. The staff began clearing the debris, but Laura lingered, staring at the empty frame where the coyote had vanished. The desert wind whispered across the lot, carrying with it the sense that this was far from over, that whatever had been set in motion, whatever ancient pact or ritual had begun, was only just unfolding. The coyote's silvered fur glinted under the harsh fluorescent light, shredded and streaked with blood where shards of glass had cut deep into its flanks. It writhed, straining through the jagged opening, eyes locked on Hostin-Yazzie as if drawn by some invisible tether. And then, impossibly, the old man rose beside his chair, not shuffling, not frail, but steady and unyielding. A laugh spilled from him, rich and vibrant, the kind that carried memory and understanding, not the empty echo of dementia. His gaze met the struggling animal, bright, alive, alert. Arms outstretched, he beckoned, and his lips moved in silent words that Laura couldn't hear over the wailing alarm. Every protocol, every rule she had memorized in 15 years of nursing dissolved in that instant. She knew she couldn't wait. She grabbed the emergency kit from the wall outside the room, sliding the scalpel from the suture tray, the metal cold in her hand. Her master key clicked in the door lock and she stepped inside, heart pounding. The coyote's body quivered in the window frame, blood spreading across the floor, mingling with glittering shards of glass. For a single heartbeat, their eyes met, pleading. Desperate, fearful, it was too late to hesitate. Laura acted purely on instinct, every ounce of her experience screaming at her to protect her patient. She lunged, the scalpel slicing through the tense shoulder of the animal. A yelp, unnervingly human, pierced the chaos. The coyote recoiled, wrenching itself free, tumbling onto the concrete, leaving a crimson streak across the cold floor before disappearing into the black night. The alarm shriek filled her ears, but her attention was fixed on Hostin-Yazzie. He stood tall, impossibly upright, untouched by age or infirmity. His frailty, the failing body she had cataloged in charts and notes, had vanished. He smiled, and it was a smile that should never have been possible on a human face. Relief, recognition, and an ancient, unknowable knowing lurking in those dark eyes. "Thank you," he said, voice clear and unbroken, steady as if the dementia had never existed. Weeks of silence collapsed into that single utterance, chilling Laura deeper than any muteness could have. He stepped closer, deliberate, each movement measured and unnervingly purposeful. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, yet her body refused. Hands still gripping the scalpel, she could feel the weight of the room, the tension between life and something older, something wrong. "You protected me," he murmured. "You kept him away when he would have destroyed us both. And now," his eyes closed, expression folding into fierce concentration, "now I remember your skin, warm, full of life." The door burst open behind her. Hector and two night staff flooded into the room, alarms blaring, flashlights cutting through the dim. They froze, taking in the shattered window, the slick trail of blood, Laura standing with the scalpel, and Hostin Yazzie advancing toward her, that same impossible, terrible smile etched across his face. Hector shouted, commands sharp and frantic, the sound barely piercing the weight of what was happening. For Laura, for a single suspended heartbeat, the world held its breath, and everything she thought she knew about reality unraveled in that room. Laura froze in the doorway, heart hammering, unsure if Hector's shouted commands were meant for her or the patient. Hostin Yazzie's eyes snapped open, and in that instant everything familiar fell away. They weren't human eyes, not merely alert but wild, luminous, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights like a predator's gaze. Emerald and gold swirled together, impossible and alive. He scanned the men, then shifted his attention back to her, a slow, chilling smile spreading across his face. Too many, he seemed to say without words. Can't take them all, not yet, but soon. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he eased back into his chair. In the space of a heartbeat, the brilliance drained, the cunning and awareness dimmed, leaving only the frail, old man the charts described. Yet even in that collapse, those eyes, impossible green gold, impossibly aware, caught Laura's gaze, and she saw herself reflected there. A woman in blood-splattered scrubs, scalpel in hand, standing amid shattered glass and the ruins of protection. The investigation took hours. Security footage captured the coyote forcing its way through the broken frame, Laura stepping in, driving it away. Maintenance boarded the window, swept shards from the floor, and a doctor examined Hostin Yazzie, noting a stable condition, unchanged, unresponsive to speech. No one questioned her. By protocol, she had acted perfectly, protected a patient from a dangerous animal. Hector commended her decisiveness. The director left a message of thanks, and animal control organized a hunt to track and euthanize the injured coyote before it could harm anyone else. But Laura knew. Sitting in the break room at 4 a.m., sipping cold coffee, she felt the weight of what she'd done. She hadn't just defended her patient, she had interrupted something she could not understand, something that needed to happen. Delaz's warning echoed in her mind, don't help it. Whatever you think you're doing, don't help it. Get inside. She had done the opposite. She had barred the medicine man, stopped the ritual. Whatever it was that might have freed or ended the thing wearing Hostin Yazzie's skin. And now it knew how to wake, knew how to return. Waiting, patient, calculating. By the time her shift ended at 7, Laura was numb. She drove home in silence, called in sick for the next 2 nights, and spent that time staring at the walls of her apartment, telling herself she had imagined the eyes, the intelligence, the impossible awareness. That fatigue and stress had conjured patterns where none existed. On the 3rd night, she forced herself back. The ward was quiet, eerily so, when she stepped inside. Every instinct screamed caution. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too long, as though waiting. But Hostin Yazzie sat in his chair as always, facing his window, still, silent. Yet Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something, unseen and patient, was watching her back. The lights in the hallway flickered softly as Laura paused outside room 714. The renovations were flawless. Fresh glass, reinforced sensors, everything restored to the way it should have been. Yet the stillness behind that door carried a weight that made her chest feel tight. She moved through her shift like someone walking underwater, doing everything right but feeling none of it. When the clock drifted past 2 a.m., she realized she had returned to the same doorway without remembering the steps that brought her there. Through the small observation window, Hostin Yazzie sat in his familiar place, bathed in the faint glow leaking in from the hallway. His chair faced the repaired window just as before. Beyond the glass, an unmoving parking lot, a stretch of desert lit only by the moon. No figure stalking the edge of the building. No ritual in progress. Nothing to warn her of what waited inside. With a slow breath, she unlocked the door and stepped into the dim room. The old man's profile was outlined against the window, his eyes fixed on the night outside. His stillness was unnerving. No tremor in his fingers, no restless twitch of confusion, just a rigid, unnatural calm. She hovered in the doorway, realizing the truth she had tried to avoid. The thing that had come for him was not returning. Whatever chance it had to end this, she had ruined it, and whatever lived behind Hostin Yazi's eyes knew it. As she moved closer, the faint reflections from the lot shimmered in his gaze. He hadn't acknowledged her, hadn't growled or muttered, just sat as if carved from stone. Only when she reached the edge of the bed did he finally turn his head. His face was slack, expressionless, like any other patient lost in memory. But his eyes, those eyes were alive. They were sharp in a way that didn't belong to a man his age or condition. Something ancient and calculating sparkled there, something that understood her completely. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The message lived in the quiet between them. He was waiting. Waiting for the hour she would be alone. Waiting for the moment no one else would walk in. Waiting for the body he had worn for years to fail just enough, so he could slip into hers. 7 years trapped in a vessel that was breaking down. 7 years of trying and failing to complete whatever dark transformation he'd begun. And she, by protecting him, had given him time. She had driven away the one chance to stop him. Laura stumbled back, reaching blindly for the door, never taking her eyes off him. He watched her with the calm confidence of a predator that knows its prey can't run far. When she stepped out, she locked the door on instinct, though the gesture felt meaningless. Locks had never been what kept him contained, only the failing body he was desperate to escape. Back at the nurse's station, she sat rigid in her chair, staring at the monitor showing room 714's door. The seconds crept by with painful slowness, every sound in the ward magnified, every shadow threatening. Because she understood now, fully, terribly, that the thing in that room was waiting just as she was. It had learned patience inside its prison of bone and failing flesh. It had waited years for the moment she had unknowingly delivered. And Laura realized with a cold, sinking certainty that she wasn't simply part of the story anymore. She was part of its plan. The ward was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes every heartbeat echo. Patients drifted through their own inner worlds, lost in fading memories that slipped further away with each passing day. Outside, the November night stretched endlessly toward dawn. Somewhere beyond the desert's edge, a wounded creature, whether Kaiser or medicine man in disguise, retreated into the shadows, its mission unfinished, its purpose suspended. Inside room 714, the being that wore Hostin Yazi's face sat motionless in his chair, gazing out the window. Its patience was absolute, something no human could ever truly embody. It no longer sought rescue or intervention. It waited instead for opportunity. It understood with cold precision that eventually, inevitably, someone would enter its room alone. Someone like Laura. Someone who would unknowingly step close enough to make the final exchange possible. Laura thought fleetingly of calling Delab, of issuing a warning that might prevent disaster. But the words would have sounded hollow, the ramblings of an overworked nurse clinging to shadows of intuition. Beyond the weight of her gut, beyond the clarity in a gaze that should have been dulled by dementia, she had no proof, only certainty, and certainty was fragile. So she did nothing. She finished her shift. She went home. And then she returned the next night as nurses do, out of duty, out of habit, out of a stubborn human insistence to care, to protect, to preserve life, even when that life was no longer fully human, even when protection demanded sacrificing a piece of herself, risking the barrier between her body and whatever waited to inhabit it. Every instinct screamed at her to avoid room 714, to stay away from the chair by the window. But she knew she would enter again. She knew she would see the eyes that were not quite eyes, the patience that was not quite human. She would confront the thing that had learned to wait, to endure, to plot in silence, moving through the hospital with predator-like patience, always ready for the next unwitting helper. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, the ward's quiet absolute. And in the center of it all, Hostin Yazzie sat at his window, no longer growling at the glass, no longer searching for aid. He simply waited. Laura's hands rested on the desk, steady, controlled. And for a brief, chilling instant under the sterile light, she imagined that the eyes behind the window were not watching the world outside. They were watching her, feeling through her, sensing the life that could one day be theirs.